Let's start with submitting. How can we submit our form and get all the values the user entered? As mentioned before, this form widget helps us with that. But first of all, we need a trigger that actually leads to that form being submitted. And I will actually go with two triggers. One of them is the done button on the image URL, because that's the last input here. So I think it makes sense that hitting enter here would try to submit the entire form. And I also want to have a save button here in the action bar that should also try to submit the form. Of course, you could also have a button below these inputs here if you wanted that. So let me first of all add this button here in the app bar, a simple icon button where I use an icon which is the save icon, this disk icon here. And when this gets pressed, then I want to try to save the form. And the same for the soft keyboard, the done button here on the image input here. For that, let's add a new method. And I'll call that method, which doesn't return anything, underscore save form. The name is totally up to you. Save form is the method I want to trigger here when we press that icon button. So I point at save form here for on pressed. And I want to trigger save form for my image input down there. And here, I in the end want to listen to the on field submitted event, which is triggered when the done button is pressed on the soft keyboard. There we get the value, though I don't care about that, so I don't really need to do anything with it. And I then want to trigger save form. Whoops, without the arrow. Underscore save form, of course. Now important, I'm using an anonymous function here to wrap my save form call instead of just pointing at save form, because onField submitted expects a function that takes a string value. Save form, my function here, doesn't take a string value, so I can't point at it. It's the wrong format. It isn't the kind of function Flutter expects here. Instead, I need a function, and hence the anonymous function, which takes that input, even if I don't use it, and then in there I can call save form, and now a reference to this anonymous function is passed to onField submitted, and Flutter will execute this anonymous function when we press the done button in the soft keyboard. Then we call save form, and now of course the big question is, what happens in save form? Here I want to submit my form with the help of the form widget to then get access to all the values. Now for that, you need a way to interact with the form widget from inside this method. You want to do something like form.submit or form.save or anything like that. So how can you get a direct access to that form widget from inside your code? For that, you can use a global key. We haven't used a global key before because you need it very, very rarely. You typically need it when you need to interact with a widget from inside your code, as we now need to, and that's about it. And mostly you do that with form widgets and not really that much with other widgets. So hence here, we add a new property in our state, a property that should hold that global key. And I'll name this underscore form. You can name it however you want. And you create a global key here by instantiating global key. And global key actually is a generic type where you can add angle brackets to make it clear which kind of data it will refer to. It will refer to our form widget, and to be precise, global keys can then hook into the state of widgets, so it will in the end refer to form state. Form state is a class which is available because we import Material Dart. So the global key will allow us to interact with the state behind the form widget, so to say. And therefore now we can assign that form key to the form to establish that connection, simply by setting the key argument here to form, which is our global key. Now we can use the form property to interact with the state managed by that form widget. And form is a stateful widget. It's invisible, but behind the scenes, it does indeed work with your form elements here and give you easy access to all your form values. By the way, on the form, you can also set other things like auto validation, so that after every keystroke, your validation logic runs. We haven't added validation logic yet, so we can't see that yet, but that's something you could set up as soon as we do add it. Here you can set up a global onChanged listener, which will fire whenever you type something into any of the inputs in the form. And on will pop is basically a function that will allow you to stop dismissing this page if the user is still editing this form. Here, the key setting was important for us. And now with that key, with the form property, which has access to this form widget or to the state of the form widget now, we can reach out to that property, to the form property, and call current state dot save. Save is simply a method provided by the state object of the form widget. So that's basically a method provided by Flutter for you for the form widget, which will save that form. And now what does save form do? Save form will now trigger a method on every text form field, which allows you to take the value entered into the text form field and do with it whatever you want. For example, store it into a global map that collects all text inputs. For that, let's go up to the beginning of our state object again, and let's add another property, not a final one though, which should describe a product. And for that, we need to import our product class from the providers folder and their product Dart file. Because I want to create a new variable, a new property here, and actually I can use the var keyword for that because I will initialize it with a value, which holds my edited product. And there I create a new product, which initially has an ID that is null, let's say. It has no ID. It has a title, which is empty. It has a price, which is 0. It has a description, which is empty. And it has an image URL, which is an empty string. So it's basically an empty product, you could say. Not technically, it's an object, which is totally there, but it has empty values. Now my plan is to update this edited product when save form is executed, and therefore we call save on the overall form widget. Because as I mentioned, this will now execute a function on every text form field. It will execute the onSaved function. And that executes a function then, which takes the value that's currently entered into this input field, and then you can do whatever you want with that value. And here, for example, you can reach out to your edited product and set this equal to a new product, because you might remember that in the product, all these properties are final. So we can't reassign the value after a product has been created. So instead we have to create a new product and override the existing edited product with it. And with that here, we can create a product which takes all the old values of the existing added product and overrides the one value for which this text form field was responsible. So here we could set the title is now equal to value, right? Because that is what was entered into this text form field. For the other fields, like the price, we take the existing edited product dot price, and for description, the existing edited product dot description, and for the image URL, the existing edited product dot image URL, and for ID, well, we keep that set to null. Now, of course, instead of constantly recreating such a product, alternatively, you could create a new class which you only use for submitting your form data, which you could also name product or name differently, which has mutable, so editable properties, so that you don't have to recreate this all over again, but you can simply edit the properties in the existing object. That would be an alternative. Here I'll go with the product we have, which is immutable, and therefore I'm also fine with recreating this. So back to the added product screen. This is my onSaved method for the title. We can now simply copy that to also add it for the price. And there, of course, we don't initialize the title with the value, but instead we keep that to edited product.title. But the price here is now set to value. And now the problem is price expects a number, but value is always a string. Well, we simply have to parse that to a number. Simply by calling double parse value and add a comma here. This will convert this to, a double. Now with that, we can move on to the description. Also add onSaved there. For the title, we keep the edited product.title, of course. For the price, we keep the edited product.price, but for the description, we now take the value that was entered. And with that, let's move on to our image URL down there. Here we also add on saved. We keep edited product.title here, we keep the price, we keep the description, but for the image URL, we use that value. And please keep in mind, right now we're not validating the user input, so we could totally submit invalid input, but that will soon change. So with that, we're constantly creating a new product where we keep the data from the other inputs and simply add the data of this input, so that by the end, we have edited product, which holds a product where all the properties should be filled with the inputs from our various inputs here in our widget tree. So after calling save here, in the end, at some point, edited product here should have the title we entered, should have the description, and so on. So let's check this here real quick by printing the description, the price, and also the image URL. And with that, I'd say let's save this, reload that page, and enter test, maybe a price of $12.99. This is a test. And then here, time for a URL again. So simply paste it in again, like this. And now we can submit, either by pressing the done button here on the image URL or by pressing the save button up there. If I press save here, you indeed see in the log test, this is a test, the price, and the URL. So submitting and saving the data worked. If I try the check mark here, well, we have the same output. So this also worked. So with that, we can submit our form. But of course, as I mentioned, we're not validating the input at all. And that's, of course, something we want to do to avoid that users can also submit the form without having entered a title, for example, which at the moment is possible.